this coming Tuesday, for those of you who are interested, John Grisham's new book, Sparring Partners, will be out. It's a book with 3 novellas. And the sparring partners are not boxers, but lawyers. And then on no more events until after that, until June the 6th. Jake Kaiser will be here with her first book, Daffodil Hill. Some of you may have heard of Daffodil Hill. She's recently moved here, though she in part grew up here, if I'm not mistaken, Lynn.
Yeah.
And established a farm that is used for educational purposes. I don't know too much more about it, but we can find out about it with her event, at this event. And then on June the 8th, Diane McPhail will be here with the novel Seamstress of New Orleans. And on June the 9th, we will have a virtual event for Wright Thompson and Pappyland. He'll be in conversation, a Zoom conversation with Julian Van Winkle. There will be a bottle of Pappy, whatever it's called, Pappy's bourbon, the Van Winkle bourbon will be given away. That will be raffled. And Lynn tells me that so far only 40 people have entered. So you too could be the lucky winner. But tonight we're here for Steve Yarbrough. Welcome back, Steve. And congratulations, both for this book and on in your career. Steve has, I think Ron Rash has described him as one of our greatest novelists in America, and his books have been published in Ireland, the UK, Canada, and in Dutch, Japanese, Polish, and Italian, and places where people who know how to use those languages live. I think probably most of you know he's a son of cotton farmers from the Mississippi Delta. Grew up in Indianola. He's been a finalist. His book's been a finalist for the Penn Faulkner Award for the He won the Richard Wright Award, the Robert Penn Warren Award, and I'm quite certain that he's the only writer in America who has won the California Book Award, the Massachusetts Book Award, and the Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters Award. That's that's covered some territory. He's currently teaching literature and writing at Emerson College, and as I say, is here for just released Stay Gone Days, the story of 2 sisters who are close and become disconnected, but never stop thinking about each other. And one day, one of the sisters walks into a bookstore and sees that there's a book written by her sister entitled Stay Gone Days. So, without anything further, please join me in welcoming Steve Yarbrough. I changed cases and I still don't recognize it.
This is my favorite place to be, and I make no bones about it. I was here, I think, the night it opened, and, I've always considered it ground zero for me and for my life as a writer, and it's just always a great joy to be back here. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
So the book is about, as Richard said, a pair of sisters, and I should say something maybe about why, in the midst of the Me Too movement, a 62 or 63-year-old white guy might decide to write from the point of view of two women? And the answer is that, I am fond of saying I've got, 2.5 male friends. So there's Richard and Ron Rash, and I'll let everybody figure out who the other half is. But my friends have always been women, and I was raised mostly by my mother and my grandmother. So from the very beginning of my writing life, I felt like that was something I could do. And people would tell me if I did it wrong. So my life has sort of revolved around 3 pairs of sisters. One pair is my daughters, who are 17 months apart, don't look anything alike, don't think alike, don't behave alike, just as different as 2 human beings could be. Another pair are my wife and her sister, 19 months apart, don't look alike, don't think alike. One lives in Poland, one lives here. I've watched them get closer as they got older. And then my best friend in California was one of a pair of sisters, 17 months apart. They at least look alike, but their all similarity ended. And I sort of watched how the death of her sister maybe 10 years ago changed her life. And so there's a bit of all those folks in this novel. And so I think what I'll do is just read the opening page or so, which sets some things up. And then I'm going to read about a 5-page section from later in the novel. I did a reading, last Saturday at Book Passage in the San Francisco Bay Area, and the events coordinator there was someone who had me do a book signing in Fresno in 1994 for a collection of stories. It's a story I love about my younger daughter. She was born with this little gravelly voice, like that. And because she spoke Polish before she spoke English, she rolled her R's, so she would say, "I want a drink of water." At that signing in Fresno, I was reading a story from my second book of stories, and with first-person narrator who's talking about his daughter, Carol. And in the midst of my reading, we hear this little gravelly voice saying to her sister, "Daddy is lying. He has no daughter named Carol." Try getting a reading going after that. In Ella's recollections, their house stands on the east side of the gravel road, a cotton field to the north, an orchard to the south. It's a boxy little 2-bedroom with sheetrock siding, hot in spring and summer, cold in fall and winter. They had a window unit, but it mostly just made noise. They had a fireplace too, but it stayed boarded up because one time they found a dead snake there. The orchard wasn't really an orchard. That's just what their father chose to call it. About halfway between the house and their neighbor's soybean patch languished a lone Bartlett pear. Some years the fruit was fit to eat, but most years not. She thinks the plot used to be a garden, that maybe at one time their parents grew watermelons and tomatoes and whatever else people in the Delta like to eat. Okra possibly, black-eyed peas. Her father was not officially a farmer then, though he used to be. He drove a propane truck during the day, but studied electronics at night via correspondence course through the Cleveland Institute, which was not up the road in Cleveland, Mississippi, but hundreds of miles away in Ohio. Whereas he once spoke the language of agriculture, tossing around terms like hill drop, strict middling, and string out, he'd recently adopted a new vocabulary, talking constantly of triodes, diodes, and electrodes. One day he went to Jackson to take an exam and returned with a certificate that pronounced him a certified electronics technician. From that moment on, whenever he composed a letter, he typed his name at the bottom, followed by a comma, and C period, E period, T period. On the weekends, he repaired people's televisions, stereos, and radios. Years before she knew the term CD, she knew CB. CB stood for Citizens Band, the kind of radio that only he seemed able to work on. Why he failed to place periods in this particular initialism, she never understood. She accepted it on faith, along with so much else he said and did. Dear Mr. Stark, this invoice is a reminder that you still owe $17.50 for fixing your CB on 12/10/74. Please remit at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Alton Co., C period, E period, T period. The reason she knows what he wrote in those letters is that he kept carbon copies of all communications, storing them in the attic in a large metal lockbox, which she found right before they moved out. She placed it sideways on the floor on an afternoon when she was home alone and hit it hard with a pipe wrench. She often thinks of the box, how thin the metal was, how it crinkled from a single blow, how little protection it offered in the end, allowing to come to light so much that he would have preferred to keep hidden in the attic of a house soon to be abandoned. I think maybe I forgot to put my phone on silent. No, I didn't. Because if I tell one of my daughters not to call me, she's sure to call me. Which I'm happy about, actually. They're sitting in algebra when it happens. Together again in the only class they share, Ella on one side of the room, Caroline on the other. The teacher is explaining why pi can never be expressed as the quotient of two integers. Neither girl is paying attention. Ella is gazing at the back of the girl directly in front of her, willing herself not to look at the first row where Brad Moss is sitting in the seat she used to occupy. Caroline is reading the paperback novel hidden behind her open textbook, something called One for the Gods, about a romantic triangle between two men and a woman who yacht around the Mediterranean screwing fore and aft. She can't imagine how this wretched book found its way onto the book rack at Mr. Quick, but it did, and she appropriated it a couple of days ago. Sometimes you have to make do. The intercom crackles, and the principal's voice, oddly subdued, says, "We need the coal girls down in the office." 24 pairs of eyes watch the two of them rise. Each of the sisters resists the urge to glance at the other, both of them knowing that whatever led to this summons can't possibly be anything good. I believe in propane. That's what the sign on the wall behind the desk of their father's boss says. Everybody in town knows this, though few of them have seen it. They only see what you see when you enter through the front to pay your bills. There are always limits to what the public knows. The public finds out some things and invents the rest depending on the story it wants to tell itself. In the months and years ahead, Ella will invent her own version of this May morning too. A version that will be revised many times depending on numerous factors, chief among them her mood and the moments in which she reimagines it. The only thing that never changes is the ending. As she sees it, her father walks into the office at the rear of the building to learn that for the third time this week, Mr. Barkley chose to sleep late and hand the morning's duties off to his son, William. All of 22, William is wearing a crisp, white, long-sleeve shirt and a blue tie that looks like real silk. His dad's making him work at the plant for a year before he returns to Vanderbilt to earn his MBA. "How are you this morning, Mr. Cole?" William asks. "Just fine, William. What about you?" Young Barkley lifts a stack of papers, taps it against the desktop, then lays the stack right back where it was. Franklin woke me up at 4:30. I don't know what set him off. While it's not strange to know the name of your employer's German shepherd, her father might be thinking, it is odd for her son to assume that you do, or that if by chance you don't, you should. Probably a cat, he hopefully offers. Maybe so. To make matters worse, Mr. Majori's not feeling well. He called in sick. Mr. Majori is the father of Erwin, a boy who once kissed Ella on a turn row. I bet it's his gallbladder, she hears her father say. It's been acting up. Ricky Majori, her father once told her mother, would love to have his gallbladder removed, just as he would love to have his prolapse disc repaired, but he has no health insurance. Barclay Petroleum doesn't provide it. Like her parents, he's insured his kids, but that's about all he can do. At any rate, some of the scheduled deliveries are pretty pressing. This lady, Ella sees William Barclay consult a scrap of paper, then pointed the name on it with his neatly clipped nail. She's been pretty intent. 3 calls since Friday. Mrs. Pace. Oh my, look at that. A giggle. Grace Pace. And she lives on the Quiver River. Still grinning, he looks up at her dad. That's so funny, don't you think? Did her father, as William will report to Mr. Barclay and numerous others, really get a strange look on his face before replying, yeah, that's doggone hilarious. Nearly 40 years from now, she will finally gaze upon the remains of the Paces farmhouse on the east bank of the Quiver River. Anybody inclined to disbelief, assuming they have access to an old phone book or the inclination to research county records, can look up the address. Grady and Grace Pace, 100 Quiver River Road, Loring, Mississippi. At one time, her father knew that house as well as his own. He and Grady Pace went to school together. They played football and baseball together, and neither of them was very good. They both served in Korea. That was where their respective fates diverged. Alton Cole joined the Navy and never heard a shot fired. Grady Pace, on the other hand, could not swim. Inducted into the Army, he ended up in Task Force Faith and became one of the unit's 385 infantrymen who survived the Battle of Chosin Reservoir. The Weekly Times published an article about him after he returned. Unfortunately, frostbite cost him 3 toes on one foot, 2 on the other, and much of the equilibrium that comes from having 5 on each. Grady Pace used to fall a lot. It began to happen as soon as he returned home to help on his father's place. He'd climb down off their Alice Chalmers and fall on his face. That was bad enough, but at least he could put his hand out to lessen the impact. Finally, a little more than 10 years before the day William Barclay dispatched her father to deliver their gas, Mr. Pace fell over backwards. It wasn't out there on their farm. It was in the sanctuary of Quiver River Baptist Church, while he and another deacon moved along the center aisle, picking up the collection plates and handing them to people in the next row. He banged his head on a hardwood pew. Now, on this particular morning in May of '75, his brain is no longer able to send certain signals to his legs. He's been confined to a wheelchair since November of '64. You could read about that in the Weekly Times, too. Her father has never made a delivery to the Paces. Before they were on Ricky Majori's route, they were on someone else's. But due to Mr. Majori's gallbladder, which you can't get rid of because the Affordable Care Act is several decades away, there's nothing to do but head out there. With any luck, he must be thinking, he'll be able to fill their tank and escape unnoticed. The tank's not all that close to their house. She sees him climb into the old bobtail. Soon he's out in the countryside, near where he was raised, driving down a narrow gravel road. The land out here is some of the worst in the Delta. Too much acid in the ground, she once heard him say. The only things that grow well are red vines, tea-weed, cockleburs, and Johnson grass. It's hard to forge a life out here farming, but Grady and Grace Pace have attempted it with predictable results. He crosses the rickety bridge over the Quiver. Normally, the first thing he does after starting the truck is to turn on his CB. Did he do that this morning? Has he already heard her voice crackling over the Johnson whiteface? Amazing Grace, KBR 7945. He's been hearing her for years. Ella watches the bobtails slow down as he approaches their place. He drives past the house toward the tractor shed and nearby storage tank. He pulls up to the tank. He shuts off the motor. He jumps out. He slams the door. It isn't as if he never encounters her. One Saturday last fall, according to the owner of Loring Hardware, her father was in the store trying to find a part for their leaking toilet when he heard her voice. I need a box of Remington 20 gauges, birdshot'll do. Old stray's been hanging around. I don't want to kill it if I can run it off. Word will have it that her dad hunkered down in the plumbing section, pretending to examine various wax rings until she left. That he remained there for over half an hour, probably hoping she'd be in the pickup and gone by the time he reached the street. He walked out without buying anything, which amused the hardware owner. At home, in a safe spot where he thinks they will never be found, her dad has all the letters he wrote to Grace when he was in the Navy, as well as the ones she wrote him. When she returned the ones he had written, did she ask for hers back? If so, he must have lied and said he'd lost them or destroyed them or whatever. The other thing he has is a handful of letters he wrote her years later, after Mr. Pace was already in the wheelchair. It will subsequently emerge that she gave those letters back only after Mr. Pace learned of their existence. Her father must have created commotion pulling up to that tank. The Paces have a dog, which has crept out from under their house and is barking his head off. The dog no doubt annoys their father, who must have been hoping that he could complete the task he was sent to perform and escape without confrontation. She sees him hurry to the rear of the truck to release the filler hose. She watches as temptation gets the best of him, and he risks a single glance at their house. Grace Pace is standing on the back porch staring at him. She's got on a pair of faded jeans and a tie-dyed t-shirt like she's some kind of hippie, though she's 42 years old. Her hair is still short and still reddish-orange, and she's still puffing Pall Malls because when was she not? That's one thing everyone can agree on, even Mr. Pace. Mrs. Pace continues to stand there observing their father as he reels out the hose. What's going through his mind? Is he thinking that if she were to say, "Come on, Alton, let's jump in that truck and take off, cross the big river and never look back," he'd climb into the bobtail with her and disappear, leaving his wife and daughters behind? Or is he thinking that in life you have to make choices, that as bad as he wants her, he made his choice and plans to honor it? Either is possible. It's wrong to exclude the latter just because the former yields more drama. Grace opens the screen door and steps off the porch. Alton Cole holds that hose, watching her walk toward him. When she's close enough for him to see sunlight glinting off both her damp cheeks, she says, "Where's Majori? You're not supposed to be here, Alton. You know you're not supposed to." She gestures over her shoulder with her cigarette. "Grady saw you out the window. He's fit to be tied." Who in God's name needs to be tied when he's already stuck in a wheelchair? Ricky had a gallbladder attack. Ella hears her father say, "You've been hollering for gas, and I'm the only driver available. What do you want me to do, Grace?" The world is so goddamn unfair, she believes her father is thinking. "Just let me do my job," he says. "Leave me the fuck alone, and I'll be away from here and gone." He gives the refill hose a mean-spirited jerk, slamming the brass nozzle against a badly corroded release valve. Vaporized propane shoots from the tank. That Grady Pace will tell the Weekly Times he and Alton Cole used to straddle as boys, pretending it was a stallion they could ride to Kingdom Come. Grace has just taken another puff of her cigarette when the gas hits her in the face, and she and Ella's father both go up in flames. Thank you. We did my book launch at the Harvard bookstore, and I could see everything on the page just fine, and I thought, I don't need reading glasses. And then about halfway through, the words began to look very small. So, mostly I'm looking out from under them. Do you do Q&A or anything like that?
We if we have a Q and you've got the A.
All right. Anybody got a Q?
Sure, he can make up an A if he didn't have one.
Yeah, Lisa.
Congrats and thanks so much for coming back. Appreciate it so much.
Oh.
So, yeah,
You couldn't keep me away.
great to have you. But the question, I'm just wondering what Eva and the girls thought about the book. I'm sure they had plenty to say.
Yeah. Well, and another question worth asking is what would Eva's sister think about the book if she could read it, which she can't. My wife's got all the education in the world, I think 3 degrees and reads 8 or 10 languages, and has been a writer and a literary translator. Was a star student in college. My sister-in-law barely graduated from high school, didn't go to college, and has published 4 novels. She started writing about 15 years ago, so she has something in common with one of the characters in here. Eva likes the book a lot. I've written a couple of books that disturbed her. My daughters appear not to have read it yet, and I'm reminded of what Richard Bausch's daughter Amanda once said to me when I saw her I think at AWP. She was sitting in a bar, and I said, "Hey, your dad's book came out today. Have you read it yet?" She said, "You think I'm a fool?" So that's about all I can say. If they've read it, nothing bad has happened. Which is not to say it won't. Any other? Yeah, Mike?
I don't know if it's a question, not so much as a couple of comments and a thank you. The comment says this is an exceptionally fine novel, Steve. I really, really liked it.
Thank you.
And what you said came to mind. I was thinking, reading it, we throw around the word metafiction a lot and all, but that's sort of what you've got here. And when Alistair finally reads the manuscript that Carol has produced, and then they quiz each other, she realizes what I loved your comment at the end of it. What she'd written was underlined. What she'd written was honest, whether it happened or not.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really given what you just said about a lot of things. That's a good motto, a good idea.
Yeah, I tell my own students, there's the truth of journalism and there's the truth of fiction. And I see people, I think, getting into a lot of trouble because they decide how a story is supposed to go, and they're going to stick to that no matter what. And I don't know if there are any, well, there's Nat. Nat, hell of a writer, and, a young man who was my student once upon a time. I always tell people the best piece of writing advice I was ever given came from Andre Debuse in 1983. Not Andre III, but his father, Andre Debuse. I went up to Haverhill to visit him and was sitting on his back porch with him. I'd written my master's thesis at Ole Miss on his work, so this is a big thing for me. And I asked him, could you tell me how you go about outlining your stories? And he looked at me like I was completely crazy. And he said, why would I outline a work of fiction? And I said, well, I started stumbling around. They're so carefully constructed, I figured you must. And he said, you know, what I'd be worried about outlining is that, you'd stick to the outline. And if you do that, then how do you think your characters can surprise you? And I just walked right into like a left hook. I said, my characters don't surprise me. And he put his arm around me and he said, oh, Steve, you better hope they figure out how to. And I didn't know what he meant. It took me a long time writing to learn what he meant. And I see some people getting into trouble because this is how it happened in life. And that becomes their reason for writing it that way. It's the worst reason in the world for doing anything except writing a memoir. And frankly, some of my favorite memoirs, like Toby Wolfe's This Boy's Life. Really? I mean, it's a spectacular book, but do I believe every word of it is literal truth? No, but I think it's got the spirit of the truth. I mean, I know it does. So memoir is a gray area, but to me, the only thing that matters in a work of fiction is what it feels like the story demands. And I'll give you one example from this book of that, since I'm sure you've read this far. There's a business card that gets printed in the book by Ella and Caroline's father for his little, repair business. He goes to some expense to do it. He's very proud of having these business cards. And he hands it to his wife, and she looks at it and tells him that he's misspelled the name of their town. Instead of Loring, it is lording on this box of business cards. That was a typo that I made. And I was about to correct it, and I thought, oh no, I can make something out of this. And when I was 30 years old, that thought would never have occurred to me. I like to say, because I believe it, that if you're really listening to the novel, it will go where it's supposed to go. But I think it takes a long time to learn to listen, or it did me anyway.
I had to thank you, Tess's martini recipe, the 4, 5, 6. Thank you.
Did you do that?
Yeah, I tried.
And you're still here?
I'm still there.
Yeah. David?
I love the way you tell stories. I love the stories that exist within the stories that exist within the stories. And what you just read, I think, is a perfect example. Can you somehow talk about how you tell stories like that?
Well, I could, but let me tell the truth. I mean, the literal truth. Some years ago, Richard Bausch sent me an email one day, and just a single line. Hey, Steve, when you're 2 or 3 months after you finished a book, do you remember any of the choices you made? And I thought, what a crazy question. And then I thought, no. And that's the truth. I'm in such a zone that I'm not really doing a whole lot of literal thinking. Sometimes I do. For instance, a cousin of mine died in a propane accident. Right up the road from where we live, we actually heard the explosion. And I think there was a lawsuit, but I'm not sure. I was 8 years old. And nobody would say how it happened. And I forgot about it for maybe 30 years, and then I saw something about a propane explosion, it's probably 40 years, because I saw it and I thought, maybe that's something I should be thinking about. And so this was very conscious, and I can even tell you, I was calling, right? I live 4 miles from MIT. I tried to get somebody in chemical engineering at MIT to tell me how it would happen, and all they want to do is talk about theory. So I finally called a guy at Mississippi State who said simply, "Oh yeah, I can help you. How many people you want dead?" so that was very conscious, But what I think is the truest thing I could say is that I believe that with every word you read, if you're writing fiction, with every word you read and every word you write, you're teaching yourself to be in a situation where those things begin to happen for you. And I know that sounds very mystical, and I'm going to do something my wife is always telling me, do not do, because you're comparing something that's intellectual to something that's physical, but I think she's wrong. So I live in Boston, and I hate to tell you all this, but though I hated the Patriots until I moved there, I love the Patriots. So you hear somebody say, Tom Brady makes great choices, and they mean, more often than not, he goes to the open receiver. Brady holds the ball on average 2.4 seconds from the moment it touches him, from the moment it's in his hands to the moment he throws. Now, to me, that's not a decision. A decision is, we're going to get divorced, or let's sell our house. That's not what's going on there. What's happened in his case is rope training, keying on the cornerback's hips. Are they rotated in or they rotated out? That's going to dictate what happens over here, and then, it's a progression. And I know this is not physical, but certainly what a soloist in a jazz ensemble does has a physical element. And the same thing is happening there. I mean, how do you decide to play a flat seventh on the spur of a moment? It's not a decision. And so I think what begins to happen for some of us at a certain point is that there's a kind of intuition at work, and it's, at least for me and for Dick Bausch and for a lot of other writers I've talked to, it's not a question of sitting there and thinking about it. It's a question about listening to the rhythm of the story, and it goes where it should. Not all the time. Any other questions? Well, it is always such a joy to be here. It was in a different building, obviously, but I do always say, and I mean it from the very bottom of my heart, that Square Books is where my life as a novelist began. And I owe a great debt to Lisa and Richard for making that happen, not only for me, but for a lot of other writers too.
Yeah.
So